Panel 4 is called Remote Collaboration and Diversity, and we have two presentations. The first one is by Jennifer Jimenez from York University in Canada, and then we stay in Canada but move to Quebec for a presentation by Alenka Novakova. We'll start with Jennifer, and I'm aware that the conversations are kind of getting so lively. We want to spend as much time doing that, so I'm going to be kind of brief as possible in my introduction of Jennifer, who amazingly has got up about 5 o'clock in the morning to be with us. So and Lenka as well. So thank you very much indeed. So Jennifer's presentation is called Learning the Essentials for Lighting Design and Collaboration Remotely. And I know we've got lighting designers in our audience here today, so this is going to be fascinating. Jennifer is a community engaged artist in scenography with an interdisciplinary focus on participatory and inclusive performance. She's an assistant professor in dance design, technology and production at York's University School of Arts, Media, Performance and Design. So with no further ado, Leah, if we can go to Jennifer's presentation, and I look forward to watching it. Thank you.
Thank you for having me here to talk about learning the essentials for lighting design and collaboration remotely. My name is Jennifer Jimenez, and I'm an assistant professor in dance design, production, and technology at York University School of Arts, Media, Performance, and Design. My background is lighting design in devised and community performance. So I'm going to talk about the work I did with lighting design for dance this past year, which was my first time teaching the course. It's an introductory course for fourth year and graduate level dance students, giving them a foundation in the theoretical and technical aspects, along with practical experience to develop a professional approach to lighting design, either as a choreographer or potential lighting designer. Students traditionally worked with equipment in the theater and designed lights for a dance piece created by a fourth-year choreographer in what resembled a dance festival setting. The students in this class have limited to no prior experience of lighting design. Faced with the same dilemma as many on how to translate this learning process into the online environment, I reviewed the existing learning outcomes and pulled out the key themes listed here, which informed how I restructured the course. So the essential skills for creating with light, enhancing, supporting, and elevating creative work, an eye for light, understanding its relationship to emotional, psychological, and cognitive responses, and how to respond to, build on, and innovate in collaborative creative processes. So the first learning outcome I'll discuss is developing essential skills for creating with light to enhance, support, and elevate creative work. It included theoretical foundations through readings, communication skills, board and cueing skills, and assessing one's knowledge limitations and applying appropriate learning goals to address these limitations. This one being essential for an online learning environment where students would be working independently and at home. So using ETC's Augment 3D, students learned about programming with a board, the syntax involved, and the impact and importance of the timing of cues. The students didn't have any way to work with transitioning between lighting looks with whatever projects they were doing at home, so this provided that opportunity. Here's a picture of an assignment they did where they created a light design for a short piece of music. I found the software's visualization capabilities limited still in recreating an accurate representation of what light would really look like with the naked eye. So it was really important to me for the students to understand light by seeing it through their own eyes. So our next learning outcome was developing an eye for light, understanding its relationship to emotional, psychological, and cognitive responses. So we worked on this through practical assignments using at-home kits that were prepared and sent to the students, and an ongoing light journal where the students chose one of an assortment of assignments focused on looking at the interpreting light, like picture files, drawing lit fabric studies, observing light at different times of day. So here is a picture of what was in the kit contents. When putting together the lighting kit, I was looking for something that was economical, versatile, and would provide a lot of options. The student fees were used to pay for the kits. So I spent a disproportionate amount of time researching and looking at items on Amazon. And I chose Amazon because I could get free delivery and for the big items, which was a bonus. I ended up using LED lights because they use low power and low heat, and without being able to supervise health and safety for the students at home, I was super cautious that I didn't send them something that would create too much heat and cause a fire. So here is an example of their first practical assignment, applying the properties of light to change the way an object or space is perceived. And here you can see the student worked with intensity, color, and distribution of texture. Their next practical assignment was exploring Impressionism, Expressionism, and Surrealism, where students found an image representing one of the movements. They recreated the image and lighting using their kits. Then they created their own composition reflecting the movement, where they were asked to light an object in space in a style inspired by the chosen movement. This student here was working with Surrealism, and you can see her source image, her recreation, and then her image inspired by the style. The next learning outcome, responding to, building on, and innovating in collaborative creative processes, where the students worked on a light design consultation for a fourth-year choreographer for a streamed performance of dance innovations, and a collaborative project with the fourth-year choreography and video dance and intermediate performance classes. This was a partnership with the course directors Susan Lee and Freya Bjorg Olofsson. So for the light design consultation, students collaborated with a choreographer to design and propose a lighting concept and implementation plan to support a site-specific dance piece presented in a pre-recorded scheduled live stream. The students worked with the same choreographer from their collaborative project. Because they would not physically be in the same space, it was structured as a consultation and suggested lighting design for the piece. They had to work with the lights that the choreographer had access to, and some students did send pieces of their kits to the choreographer. The consultation included the light concept and suggestions on how to achieve the concept with the materials available. There was no obligation to implement the lighting concept, however, many choreographers did embrace the ideas and suggestions. So here's images from one of the dance pieces that was aired on November 25th, 2020 from Dance Innovations, the Detail series. The piece is called A Beauty to Unveil. The choreographer Bridget Dorsogna and lighting designer Naomi Henry. What struck me about this piece was the way the choreographer worked with the light moving in and out. I could also see the development and growth from the ideas that the students had explored in the collaborative project. At that time, I could see some ideas with potential, but they hadn't quite grasped them. So I was really excited to see where they landed through this collaboration. The final project I'm going to talk about is the Collaborative Exploration Project, where students from fourth-year choreography and the video dance and intermediate performance courses collaborated to explore how the site and architecture space of the camera, physical site setting, and controllable qualities of light mediate the representation of movement. So it was introduced to each class separately by each course director during their scheduled class time. Course directors from each class assigned readings that attended to site-specific performance. The readings that were read by the lighting design class are listed here, from Moving Sites, Investigating Site-Specific Dance Performance, edited by Victoria Hunter. Specifically chapters 1 and 5, Experiencing Space, the Implications for Site-Specific Dance Performance, and Embodying the Site, the Here and Now in the Site-Specific Dance Performance. All of the course groups read the Douglas Rosenberg articles from Video Space, A Site for Choreography, essays by Douglas Rosenberg. There were 1 to 2 students from each course per group, and students were instructed to meet 2 times. The collaboration happened the week before and during reading week, and the documentation was submitted 1 week after reading week. So the structure of the collaboration. We purposefully kept the project very open and explained it as an opportunity to explore, play, and have fun. So the students were instructed to, for choreographers, contribute a maximum 2-minute section of their choreography as source material for the exploration. The videographers to collaborate and discuss interesting ways for the choreographer to adapt their movement in relation to the camera, and the lighting designers to collaborate and contribute to the process by experimenting and proposing ways to work with the lighting implements available on site. All screenshots, video, and audio files were shared among the group via a Dropbox, Google Drive, etc. There was a difference in the way the groups worked together. Some really embraced the experimental process and valued propositions and experimentation from all members at the same level. Others were more rigid in the way they conducted the process, sticking to a traditional hierarchy with the choreographer seen as the director. The videographer had complete control over the final video edit. So what was submitted to each course director? So the video students submitted edited footage and written reflection. The lighting design students submitted a scrapbook of the process and a written reflection, and the choreographers submitted process documentation and a written reflection. And the same prompt questions were used for the written reflection for all the students. Here is a video clip of one of the student collaborations. So this scrapbook and reflection on the exploration we just saw was submitted by Ashwini Santharam, who was a graduate student taking the course. In her reflection, she references Victoria Hunter's discussion on how sites are informed by the individual's awareness in the space combined with their awareness of the past. Victoria Hunter describes the present and past combining to create the spirit of the place. Since our project theme was Memories in an Abandoned House, we attempted to transform the space into both the present and past. As lighting designer, I tried to do this through shadows, reflections, and tempering with the dimensions of the space. So for me, in my opinion, this project encompassed the essence of experimentation and exploration that was intended for the project. I felt it demonstrated a higher level thinking about light, exploring abstract use of light and ways it can add or make meaning. Focusing on surfaces and creating the shadow door could lead to further possibilities in a creative process. So you can see here some of the images about that exploration, working with the shadow door, the textures, the reflections. This student connected the discoveries to the group's theme and course readings, applying the theoretical concepts explored and integrating them into her own insights. And here a quote from her reflection: "The limitations of the space and technology forced me to pay closer attention to surfaces." These are some of the takeaways that were elaborated further in her written reflection, where she discussed the stages, requirements, difficulties, and opportunities of the collaborative process more in depth. That lighting is not just support, that the designer must be vocal about their ideas, watching rehearsals to understand the vocabulary being used in the creative process. And the biggest takeaway for her was the role of experimentation. It was quite essential in our collaboration process. We trusted each other and we were open to trying new things. The scrapbook and reflection allowed the light design students to show and explain the aspects of the experimentation that they found most compelling, regardless of what was included in the final video edit. It also allowed them to be in control of what they were being assessed on. This choreographer wanted to work outdoors with natural light, so the designer did additional explorations, taking the ideas that were explored outside and working with them in her own home. Here's another page from the scrapbook where they're working at night using the phone lights, paying attention to the street lamps. In here, she references noticing a moment when a car is reversing and what the red light does. Alyssa's comments about that I found really interesting. And here's her trying to recreate that moment of the car reversing. And I found this demonstrated an openness and attention to discoveries arising out of a creative process, a skill that's, in my opinion, is critical for a lighting designer. The student identified learning. We started from scratch, slowly weaving our way through the obstacles. A quote from another design student. Many students identified significant learning in communication and problem-solving skills, the importance of clarifying expectations and assumptions among the group at the beginning, and many identified that although the logistics were challenging, they really valued the lessons learned on project implementation. As course directors, we felt outside of the process. Students worked on their own, and we had minimal opportunities to see the work as it progressed due to the time frame of the project. We felt doing it over reading week gave them more time. Some found it challenging to meet over reading week. The openness of parameters caused confusion among some students. Course directors were constantly explaining the expectations. There was a difference in understanding of the roles in the collaboration and how that would translate in the process. Next time would give more attention to roles and spirit of open exploration in the setup of the assignment. There was a difference in engagement and enthusiasm between the group members. Those students who usually excel and produce creative work did so in this project. Students developed core skills in collaboration and learned about presenting work in this format. However, we felt the movement, creative content development could have been further realized. And thank you for listening to this project, and I look forward to answering any questions.
Some fascinating points raised there, and I think actually links with some of the things that were going on yesterday, particularly in say, Anna and Anna's presentation about different ways of seeing and looking. So hopefully we will develop those in the discussion. So we now go on to Lenka Novakova from the University of Quebec and Montreal in Canada. The title of her presentation is A Brief View into the Virtual Classroom of Practice-Based Education. Lenka has a PhD and is a Czech-Canadian artist, researcher and educator whose work explores performance on the margins of theatre, cinema and visual arts through large immersive environments and critical writings.
So Jane, thank you very much for this introduction. And I'm going to start sharing my screen. I hope everybody sees my screen. And it's a privilege to be here at this conference and reflect on the experience of teaching during the pandemic. I have to say that my experience, I'm going to reflect a lot on my personal experience of teaching, and also I'll really provide a personal kind of a view into the experience of my students. So I have to say that during the pandemic, I was actually a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Quebec à Montréal. I was teaching at the University of Victoria in Victoria, British Columbia, and I was also teaching at Nova Scotia College of Art and Design in Halifax in Nova Scotia. So that was on the East Coast. So I will show you a little bit what it looked like. So while I was actually based in the Arctic, I have like the map here a little bit to show you what it means globally. So I was based in Inuit, Greenland, working on my postdoc project. And then I was teaching on the West Coast, teaching on the East Coast, and my students were located all over the world. So this is kind of a view into my everyday. So every day meant checking into the time zone of Victoria, checking into the time zone of Halifax, 3 hours apart, while being in the Arctic, and also keeping in step with my students who were located all over the world. I had students in China, in Korea, also in Mexico. And as we had a number of collaborative projects, which I will start talking about very shortly, I had to make these collaborations across the time zones possible, which was a very interesting process in itself. So I will start with providing a little bit of a view of what it was like to teach actually filmmakers at Nova Scotia College of Art and Design. And these are the reflections that I would like to make today. So I was really excited watching presentations yesterday, and I caught many of those today, although it was early, so I look forward to watching it again recorded. But many of you reflected on actually the need to record performances, to make them valid in your virtual classroom. So the issue is how do we function in this virtual world with something which is live, real, and has to do with space. So interestingly, working with filmmakers, it put this situation in reverse, where we are working with students who they are learning the craft of filmmaking. But here we had a situation where overnight, all my filmmakers and makers, they were turned into performers, as they were locked in their rooms with their equipment, and they had to become, of course, performers to produce. So reviewing a lot of my students' work, these are the questions that come to mind as the filmmaking and performance and makers and performers, and reversing these roles, turning of performance filmmaking and performance makers. And the issues that I will elaborate on after I show you a few examples of my students' work is, of course, the issues of space, which is the real and the virtual. That is, we have this play in between the virtual and real constantly. Performance, the issues of performance came up. So the students were, what is performance? Performing everyday tasks and rituals. The issues of being separate and together, as I showed this kind of a global map of our locations, but through collaborations with my students, there was always this sense of being separate, and the experience of my students being very much alone in their spaces. But through collaboration, they also experienced this togetherness, which was very precious. The ideas of daydreaming and the imaginary. So I had collaborative projects, and I had also individual projects. So in my individual projects, there were issues of daydreaming that came up, where students were dreaming about the world as it was, missing and remembering and trying to put it into their creative works. Issues of memories and narratives, I will mention that a bit later. And again, projects that were collaborative and projects that were individual. So here I want to go to first example of students' work, and I'm going to read you a bit of an artist statement of this work. This short film explores the relationship of ritual to our everyday lives and how these rituals. Okay, I have to shrink this video. Okay. And how these rituals impact each person's experience of being in the world. Three of the filmmakers, Alexandra, Kate, and Selena, recorded themselves performing simple tasks such as making a cup of tea, going for a walk, to more complex practices such as spiritual ceremony. Each person was given the same prompt and filmed themselves separately. The performers also reflected on the tasks they completed and recorded their thoughts on the experience. So before I go to showing you the example of the work, I would like to mention that at Nova Scotia College of Art and Design, where I actually was teaching 3 courses of filmmaking. All my courses were students who were beginners. So we had a situation where those students who were based in Halifax, Nova Scotia, luckily they had actually good access to the equipment, to the tools, and they also had access to some assistance. So we are talking this like early in the pandemic, where as instructors, we're all learning and trying to figure out how our students were going to navigate through the technology needs. At the same time, I had students in remote areas of Canada, in remote areas of Ontario, also in BC while I was teaching on the East Coast, and students in China. I all had to provide some skill set for them, and I had to make them collaborate. So actually what happened, I put a strong emphasis on their creative powers. So the creativity was kind of above tools, because I had students in Nova Scotia borrowing cameras, while I had students in rural Ontario using their phones, and really basic things came to the basic. And also some students, of course, were scared because they never edited anything, they never used camera and such. So just so you know the level of students we are talking about, these are freshmen.
There are some tasks for me that seem to need to be broken down into smaller stages in my mind if I'm going to be able to complete them. Like there's just some kind of block, probably dissociation, that comes up if I try to do without this sense of structure. And so every time I try to do this task, I will be trying to do it exactly the same way every single time. And that means that any little hiccup that comes along the way, like putting something down in the wrong spot or bumping something on my way to try and do something, all those little hiccups just sort of interrupt the process in general, and make it a lot harder to actually complete the task. I mean, so often I lose sight of my intention, or forget to pay attention to what the incidental consequences of my actions are, and then suddenly, like, I'm left with a mess to clean up, or and I'm covering him in different objects, toys and household things. I don't know how I chose them, but he's surrounded and his body is covered, and I'm deeply focused and clearly in another reality that is entirely present, carefully, delicately placing these things on him, and he's so still and patient. And it's this really beautiful, intimate moment. And I remember when I promised my stuffed animals I'd play with them forever, and I was about 11, and a year later that stopped once my body became the object of others. And I think that's somehow related. Like, it created this spiritual gap, because the body is a conduit, and you need to be deeply in it in order to extend and transform into other realities with awareness. And I feel like I am now fulfilling that promise and finding my way back.
So I'll just go back to the PowerPoint. So you can see that my filmmakers, they were dealing actually with all aspects of performance, of stage making. This particular student made objects and staged them and learned how to record it. The same in the case of the third member actually of this team, and they all did it individually at the same time. At the end of the recording, they also felt need to express the loneliness, you know, that at the end they were really sitting in kind of a log in their own home. So I just wanna brought up these issues that came out of this particular example because I found as I rewatched many of the works of my students that these kind of things repeated in all my collaborative and individual projects. So issues of performance. Each person recorded themselves performing simple tasks such as making a cup of tea, going for a walk, to more complex practices such as spiritual ceremony. The being separate and being together. Each person was given the same prompt and filmed themselves separately. The reflection and narrative following the performance. The performers also reflected on the task they completed and recorded their thoughts on the experience. So this is also very interesting that the narrative actually came after. We're often in theater, we see the text and the narrative before, so here it came in reflection. So another example is just very quick example of individual work and of issues of daydreaming. So my film is about a daydream in quarantine. The images I use in the daydream are memories of things I did in my life before COVID, earlier in my life, as well as earlier this year. The images represent things like traveling, being outside in crowds, and riding the bus to school. I animated daydream in grayscale to give for ominous feel that represents a fear of things never going back to normal. So yes, this was a time where students, you know, kind of, they felt so isolated and nobody knew how it was going to turn out. So this is a good example of their daydreaming idea. So again, quick back to the presentation. So in reflection on this example, actually, I'd like to say that also, I really tried to make the best out of the situation we had. And this also gave me opportunity, as I also have a projects all around the world, and have friends and collaborators and colleagues everywhere. So I also had a great opportunity to bring in guest speakers and to give lectures or similar things. So for instance, I had this abstract animator came in. So a lot of my students also all of a sudden started including you know, these, it was a privileged kind of a position to be able to navigate virtually. And so animation appeared in many of my students' projects as well. there's a very quick example of another individual project that kind of benefited from this lecture animation that we had. But it's very similar theme. My narrative short film is an invitation not just to my home, but to my own perspective as well. One day in my Halifax apartment is a view into my life as an art student living in the edge of a global pandemic. Using handmade animated artwork, I chose to tell the story of my own daily routine. So I'll just give you a quick view into, and this is a student straight out of a high school who never, like I said, never put hands on filmmaking. So bear that in mind. So again, quickly back to my PowerPoint, just the last kind of a closing comments. So I won't get to these examples, but these courses continued in this spirit where, again, this is a collaborative project where my students in a team of 5 collected all their mornings, each in their separate living spaces, which became their own theaters of their acting, and then they put it together. So it actually seemed that they lived together. There is another project that actually where they dined together. They all decided that they would make pizza, each in their own living space, and then they dine together. So again, I will examples were many. I won't get to show all of them. I'll be finishing very soon, but this short film takes a closer look at how the pandemic has affected our daily life. So again, very similar, but I'll just show you the beginning where it's apparent.
I'm no different. I'm tired. I want this to be over with. And we know it's going to take a while. And we know that we can do this, right? And while we're doing it, and while we're getting through the period waiting for the vaccine, we've got to make sure we keep using those really excellent social practices, wearing your mask, washing your hands, not touching your face. They all want to get back to a regular life. They want their families back into a regular life. They want the economy to restart, and they want to get back into the schools and not have to.
Yes, so these were my filmmakers, and I want to get into the experience of teaching the students at the University of Victoria as much, but I would say it was very similar. The students really put out amazing projects. They collaborated, and their approach was more tying their work into the website, where you could navigate through their virtual world. So we had subjects of the environmental art. So it was really interesting to actually see the opinions on the art and environment throughout globally, the same on art and architecture and public art. In this group, for instance, in public art, there were students from Mexico who walked the streets, of Mexico City, in British Columbia, in Toronto. So it ended up very, very rich.
I actually found both of those presentations really affecting, I have to say. I mean, in many ways. I mean, it's just extraordinary, the sense of longing for the students, from the students, to be somewhere else, for another time, place, space, other than the present. But at the same time, I was reminded of some of the things that Anna was saying yesterday. Anna was saying about this notion of reacting to the world and responding and making work from that reaction. And I think the minutiae, the detail, the looking that went on in those projects was quite extraordinary. Jennifer, the use of, I thought the way, I mean, these are comments, not questions. I'll get these out of the way, then I'll ask some questions. But the way in which your students used natural light, used the real world, the actual world, as Theo Brejak says, we shouldn't talk about the real and the virtual because the virtual has its own reality. So we talk about the actual world. In the actual world, the kind of ways in which those students were engaging with light. I'm not a lighting designer, and I don't know whether that is how you would always start with lighting, with how it would always be taught. But the detail was extraordinary, and I'm interested. A question I have for you first, before I ask Lenka, is how much in that choreographed piece that you said was in development on the stairs, how much did the choreographer learn or take from the lighting designer? Because that seemed to me where light was leading choreography rather than the other way around. So I'd be interested to know how those relationships worked in those projects with a little bit more detail.
Yeah, I think one of the things that came out of the collaborative exploration, which was then brought into that, was the opportunity that all of those students, whether they were in choreography or video, got a chance to think about and play with light in a way that they wouldn't have done when they were just doing their, like if they hadn't had that engagement and interaction with the lighting designer. So in that piece, there was only 2 lighting cues, where there was the first cue, and then and it was really beautiful because the one cue, it had a one look, and then there was just this moment where the light switched to the look that you saw in that picture, and then the choreographer playing in and out of the light. I mean, I think in many ways the light, like you said, it directed the way that it had to change the choreography, because she was purposefully playing with it in and out. So yeah, I think it definitely took their work to another way of thinking. Normally they would have been sitting in a theater and they would have been engaging with the lighting designer side by side, looking at the stage, which does then make them think about lights, but not in such a sort of, like you said, basic and sort of really deep way. Does that make sense?
No, completely. And the same with the piece with the hands. I thought that, I mean, hands are featured throughout this all these symposia. Hands is the kind of I suppose the primary instruments, if you like, for touch and the haptic and the tactile. And it's interesting how hands have come with the hands round the T in Lenkers. And yesterday we saw hands in the present, you know, they've become so present. I've never looked at hands in quite the same way. But I'm gonna just go to Lenka, because I know there's going to be a lot of questions. I just wanted to talk to you about this, again, extraordinary sense of longing, of this, you know, and the way in which you uncovered this whole sort of, I suppose, spatio-temporal kind of thing that you're having to work with all the time, where spaces and time is all kind of messed up, except it isn't. It's what it always was, but it's our perception of it that's changed, I think, hasn't it? And I wanted to just talk to you a bit more about that, because I think that's one of the fundamental things that this new world we're in is opening up, this relationship between space and time, and how, but I don't know if, I'm very fond of Doreen Massey's writing, who writes about simultaneousness or simultaneity, you know, that all these things are going on simultaneously. But of course, in our own worlds, we don't think about that. We're just in our own time-space zone, spatial time zone. But actually, there's all this stuff going on. Now we're bringing that out. And you, obviously, your project completely had to play with that. So I just wanted to, you know, learn a bit more about that, really.
For me, it was fascinating, you know, where we started with like all these questions, how are we going to make this happen, you know, and then so things evolved over time and became more and more fascinating also for my students, you know, these things. Of course, there, like you mentioned, there was these feelings that were like inner longing and loneliness. But then since I was teaching a lot of courses, I was teaching 3 courses in Halifax and one in British Columbia. So it also gave me opportunity to always try new things with my students and then reflect on it. And then in the next class, you know, try to imply new things. So we were moving along very quickly. And then I found out that really collaborations gave my students wherever they were in the world, which is really interesting to think about in terms of space, kind of a sense of togetherness, because they had to work together outside the classroom time. So it also provided for them this kind of a social, very normal interaction. I think any creative team needs to have this kind of friendship, you know, where you work, where things go really well, and then maybe you go for a beer. So I became also aware of this, and I think this collaborating provided that, because they had to work outside the classroom. So I wasn't present part of the time, and they had to work together. And I think that made it successful. But there, a lot of new ideas came out of this whole thing, like you say, ideas about time, where you bring, you know, students from different time zones and different times into one virtual space. And again, where they create within, you know, their own culturally and socio-politically, you know, different environment, and they come together. For instance, we discussed the issues of the global pandemic regularly, because it was very different in each part, you know, and the regulation changed. And yeah, so there's a lot to think about, you know. I think in terms of time, of course, space, and what is performance. I think it will take me a while to like absorb. I think we're
all in that position up. We're all kind of absorbing it. I just briefly say, Arnold Aronson did a very good introduction to Staging the Future, which is online and a resource your students might like, where he talks about this thing of being in this space, which is kind of nowhere. You know, historically, we've always imagined that theatre happens somewhere. But then he talks about when you're in this virtual space, you're kind of nowhere. You're everywhere and nowhere. And quotes Gertrude Steiner saying, where are you when there's no there? And I love this idea of us all floating around in this kind of soup of nowhereness, you know.
You know, I'm really glad you bring it up. I think I have to reread the Staging of the Future, but I think Arnold also kind of was elaborating on this kind of a fast progress of technology that is taking us someplace, and these questions of virtual theater and where is it going? Where is it, you know, it's a fast speed. But at the end, I think this also proved the power of the virtual, but at the same time, the longing for being in one space, which is really important, you know. And so I think no matter how the technology advances, I think we'll always have the longing, the fascination, of course, with technology and what's possible. That's amazing. But also this longing for togetherness, in the real world. Yes.
I'm going to go to questions. I think, Peter, did you have to say something? And I know that Andreas wants to say something.
And mine was quite a basic question to Jennifer. And it really was, I noticed that you had a credit for editor with your film. Can you tell me how that collaboration worked? So, because of course we were looking at close-ups, detail, as Jane said, but was that part of the editor's work, doing those, or was the editor just stringing the film together, as it were?
Yeah, the collaboration, the students were instructed to work together. So all three, or, you know, like students from all the three classes were together whenever they were exploring. So that was, and so they would have played with different video stuff. So then the editor then chose, which was the video student, they chose out of all of that footage what to string together, because some stuff that they explored didn't end up in the edit. But they did it. It's not that they sort of individually, but in the process, they would have, whatever they wanted to explore through the camera, they would have done that. So it was collaborative in that way. And then that's why I had, like I said, I had the scrapbook, because there would have been moments that maybe the lighting designers would have found interesting, that, and if they didn't end up in the final edit, they wouldn't be there. So that gave the opportunity for them to put down and show what were some of the things that were interesting to them.
Right. So, in fact, the editor had the final say, really, in what the outcome.
Yeah. Although the thing is, it's not that they were creating a film. They weren't meant to be creating a video. They were doing an exploration. So each of the students created the documentation of that exploration that fit with whatever course that they were in. So it wasn't that they were instructed to make a video. They were instructed to have an exploration and explore how, you know, movement, you know, translates to the camera and what they can play with. So it was, so it wasn't that they were working towards a final piece in that way. They were working in the exploration. So it was just about the way they document and put that exploration together was based on the course that they were taking. And then that allowed them to sort of further explore that aspect in the way they wanted to.
Thank you. Thanks.
Andreas?
Yes, that was fascinating, both presentations, and I felt that it has to do a lot with a common ground, which was about content and the context of most of the work, which was very, very directly related to the everyday life, actual life of each one of the artists, students. So I was wondering if you feel that the fact that they were talking about their own experiences with simple everyday life elements in their work was one of the reasons that the work is so powerful.
Well, I think what happened, and in general, but I think it became apparent through the creative works, that like the inner, and I'm just kind of thinking of a piece of writing, but I can say it in my own words. The inner world becomes the world in a way, where, you know, these students were experiencing, because they had sort of speak nothing else than themselves, then they were really, it became the world. They became the world, you know, and their exploration, and I think it was very rich. But so that's what they had, and that's what they worked with, and I think it was fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say a lot of the work that the students produced this year, and not just, I'm not talking specifically about the lighting students, but say for where we were the dance to students and their final videos, the dance innovations were very, because they were all doing them from, they were doing them from home. So even the third year choreographers, the fourth year choreographers, they created their pieces. They were very, they were very powerful, and they talked about, and they talked about sort of the essential, sort of the core essential things. Some of them talked about identity, and they yeah, about the realities and stuff, you know, through dance. And so I think in some ways when an event like this that happens, that's so real, that's so shared by so many people, it does definitely, you know, create, and I think it creates also a deeper understanding for the audience watching, because the content and what they talk about resonates so much with all of us, because we're all experiencing, we're all having such similar, obviously the pandemic in different ways, but we're still experiencing this pandemic. So it's one of those, I guess, unique moments, right? Because in performance and in theater, you don't always, like, people in the audience might might connect with what's happening on the stage, but not, you can't guarantee to the same level that everybody now is connecting with the same thing, because we've all gone through this experience together.
Can I just jump in there? I know that Anna has a question which kind of develops your question, Andreas, about the individual moving to the kind of collective, how you move through that. And I think she'd like a little bit more detail on that. Anna, yes. Do you want to ask a question, Anna?
Yes, I'm here. Yeah, congratulations, beautiful presentation. And what was intriguing me so much in both of the presentations was this were this very individual feelings, explorations of a room, even explorations of a room. It made me sometimes think of, I think it's Xavier Demetre who wrote this book, A Journey Around or In My Room in 1800. So very personal stories, but you both made an artwork that was a work of a collective narratorship. How did you work on this narrative? I think, Lenka, you said the narrative came later. Jennifer, you talked about working together to make a certain narrative. How did you make this individual experience collective?
Well, the students were, well, that was what was interesting. They were all individual, but they were working together through the camera, like through the internet, right? So that's what I found was interesting, because in many ways the working together, like if you were working together in person, some of the same things, like some of the same sort of communication issues come up, but through the internet or through doing it online, it really, for them, a lot of the comments highlighted on, because when they identified sort of what they're learning, most of it was around the communication, because they were so dependent on, they couldn't do, like yesterday's, you know, they couldn't just go and grab something and do it. They had to really work on that communication, and we're so dependent on each other. So I think and then the work that they created, so they created so the experience was collaborative, the exploration, and that was the collaborative piece. And then the final project, the final product, for example, in terms of, or the documentation, not that it was a final product, but the documentation was then the individual piece. That's what then each individual person took away from that collaborative experience, whatever they felt was significant for them to document.
Okay.
So on my end, I want to just quickly reflect on this. Anna, I'd like to say that since many of my students, it was their very first experience of the creative process. So what was the most valuable, that these big issues came out of the process, you know, like a very innocent process. They were learning on the go. So they learned that they became performers. They didn't know what it was going to be like to perform, you know. So they set up some setup that they thought, and then they performed. And then they would become their own audience, because then they would watch their recording, and they were also makers, you know, so they worked with it and they reflected as audience of their own performances. They reflected on the process, and then they thought, okay, narrative. And then they reflected again on this inner experience, and they provided the narrative. So I think what is really valuable is this constantly shifting roles and evolving, you know, from that, where you're a performer, your own audience, you're observer. From the observation, next step, narrative and presentation. I thought that's what this process provided. It's very rich.
I just wanted to add to that. I mean, my question would have been, was there anything that we saw that would have been improved by having actors doing it? And actually, my answer would be no, not really. And I think that what is extraordinary is that because they're not actor trained, that the way that the performers don't actually put themselves at the center of it. We're not what we're watching. We see them, we see the experience through the objects, through the space, through the interaction. And I think that the sort of the disappearance of ego and it starts to open up that kind of common space which we identify with. I'm not saying this very clearly, but I think this is potentially quite revolutionary for what actors are going to do, what actors are going to be in the future, because I don't think we miss the actors, which is quite an interesting in either of those pieces. I don't know, what do you think, Jennifer?
Well, I mean, the interesting thing in our they're all dance students, even the videographers, even the lighting, they're all dancers and choreographers. So, in that situation, I mean, in some ways that's a strength. So we're giving those skills to the students that are coming at it from that perspective.
Lenka?
But I think the uniqueness of the situation that there was a frame. I mean, then I felt they had no choice. They had no choice because, like I said, they had themselves, and then it becomes the material. So they were like, okay, so it was difficult to get a friend to work with physically. Later on it became possible. So then, but we were very, very careful because this was at a high stage of pandemic, so they had no choice, so they were like, okay, so I'm gonna do this myself. A lot of them, I don't like to perform, I'm a maker, but I write about performance, I think about performance, everything is performance, but if I have to perform, no. And so it was the same for many of my students. They're like, okay, I have to do this. So they did it, and I think they really grew from it. Yes.
I'm not saying we should do away with actors, by the way, completely. I don't want anybody to think that.
I was also going to say, actually, what was interesting in the dynamic with this is that some of the students were in 2 courses. Someone was in all 3 courses. So some students actually did the project twice, depending on their role. So, I mean, there was only one who was in all 3, and so she only did it twice, and she just sort of played 2 roles in one scenario. But so they also got a chance to really get deep because they were working with a different group, but in that scenario, looking at the project from a different perspective.
Right. I think we probably should start to wrap up now. And I've got a few things to say before we finish. I know I've enjoyed the 2 days immensely. It's been incredible to see the work, to see the commonalities of experiences, to see the differences, to see the unequal distribution of access to technology, to understand how people are getting around those things, to see just witness the amazing resilience and desire to make work in these difficult circumstances, led by amazing tutors and of course the extraordinary students who adapt so quickly and we learn so much from. This event happened because we felt there wasn't a platform like this. There are other platforms, there's research platforms, I was saying this yesterday, there's more institutional platforms, but we didn't think there was anything of this, with this kind of informality where we could show work, discuss work, just talk to each other across the world, really. If you think this is important and something that you'd like to see continued, please contact us, because we would actually like to spread, for somebody else to actually take up the baton and say, okay, I'll host the next event, or host the next event with us, or something like that. So it's not just always emanating from the UK. It feels to me like this now should start to have a kind of a multi-perspectival kind of instigation, that it's coming from different places. And of course, if we think this cultural platform, although we're all fed up with looking at screens, but this is something, you know, we can still do once a year or something like that. Do please email any one of the conveners here, Andreas, Peter, myself, or Will, because we'll be meeting probably not for a little while yet. I think we all want to have a bit of a rest now, but to kind of build on this and see where we go next. So we would really like feedback, and we'd really like to know if you think this is something that we should continue to do in this manner. Also, the sustainability of it becomes very important, I think, that we can do this sustainably, whereas, you know, us all flying to meet each other is not actually a very good idea. We will meet at hopefully events anyway, if they happen, like World Stage Design. I think it's different if we're bringing students together. Hopefully projects can happen with students actually working face to face, and that's, you know, that's always a possibility. And of course, we're also learning about what each other's doing now, so there's more possibility of setting up activities, initially maybe online, then eventually, hopefully, between institutions, in the flesh, so to speak, the actual. I've got to just say thank you to Gabrielle and Leah, who've been utterly fantastic and made this so easy for us, and just, you know, really big thank you to them. I must thank Jane Knowles, Wimbledon College of Art, who has kind of helped us and supported the event and made it happen. And finally, just to thank all the presenters, all the participants, and we've had almost 100, I think, over the 2 days, and also my colleagues, my co-conveners, who it's been an absolute joy to collaborate with, and we've all kind of chipped in, and this has been a joint event. You know, it's actually we come together thinking we've identified a need, and we've worked together, and I think it's been a real pleasure to be working with everybody.